Hello, everybody. Welcome to the House of the Future. I know what you're thinking, and you're right. I'm about to present the next Apple iPhone. No, I'm not Steve Jobs. I'm Katie Nguyen with this SNF Youth Advisory Committee. I'm so honored to welcome CSIS today, along with the panel. But first, let's talk about what CSIS is. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from the researchers at Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS. Moderated by Vice President of the Andrea C. Trocopoulos Ideas Lab, Matthew Funaiole, this session is truly dynamic in how it harnesses the power of data storytelling to reveal the reality around us. As we go about our hectic lives, it's easy to be indifferent to the small changes that happen. But au contraire, our discussion holds a magnifying glass to these small events that are big enough to impact our generation and the next. I'd like to welcome on stage first Liz Pulver-Trybulski and Fabio Murgia, followed by Melina Theodosiou, Matthew Funaiole, Joyce Bongogo via video, Chris Mungai, and my fellow Youth Advisory Committee members, Sikelela Rollom and Hilary Cheng.
This looks like a simple cup of coffee, but it's not. My name's Liz. I work for the Andrea Trocopoulos Ideas Lab at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. And coffee is a central part of how I function as a human being. My friends and family may call it a vice, but I call it my secret weapon. But when I reach for my morning cup, I'm not thinking about where it came from. I'm using it to get through the day. The endless emails and notifications, the bad news headlines on disease and violence and affordability and climate change. And I know that all of us understand that nothing in this world exists in a vacuum. But amid the chaos and information overload of our daily lives, it's really hard to take a step back and think about how what we consume, how we behave, and everything going on in the world around us is a part of the same interconnected global system that most of us never see. Well, that's what this presentation aims to show you today. These are the maritime shipping routes that move goods across the world. Over 80% of global trade travels along this map, and there are over 50,000 merchant ships on the water at any given moment. This system is incredible. It is the backbone of our global economy, and it's also quite susceptible to disruption. We've been living through one of these over the last few months with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This has impacted everything from energy markets, food prices, and political stability, far from the strait itself. And this is just one disruption, at one singular choke point, and yet all of us have felt it. These may look like a tangle of lines on a map, but it's how food reaches the grocery stores, how medicine gets to those who need it most, how the everyday items we take for granted are available without a second thought. Which brings me back to this cup of coffee. This coffee has traveled thousands of miles. It may have started in Brazil, maybe Vietnam. It could have even began in Uganda, first made a pit stop in Italy to be roasted and packaged, and then made its way here to Greece. I mean, it's probably traveled more than I have. Now, while these routes are all different, the point is the same. Even the simplest items rely on this massive global network. This cup of coffee took land, fertilizer, energy, water, land, infrastructure, labor, and political cooperation to produce. And we could focus on any one of those systems today. But for the sake of this presentation, we're going to focus on water. Not because it's the full story, but because it helps reveal the larger one. Water is embedded in nearly everything we consume. It's essential for energy, food production, medicine, and is impossible to live without. So, how much water do you think it took to produce this average cup of coffee? I'll let you think of a number in your head. And now I'll welcome my colleague Fabio to the stage to reveal the answer.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Fabio, and as an Italian, I take coffee very seriously. And yet, when Liz asked me this question back in DC, how much water does it go to make and produce one cup of coffee, I didn't know. So we did some research. It turns out one cup of coffee takes about 140 liters of water to produce. That's the equivalent of roughly 560 cups of water. All for that single cup of coffee. Think about that. Now, most of this hidden water footprint doesn't go towards brewing or roasting the coffee. It's actually used primarily at the source to irrigate the soil where the coffee trees grow. One cup of coffee, 560 cups of water. I'll confess, I never thought of this, never thought of the hidden water cost of my coffee. And I've been drinking it every day, well, really multiple times a day for most of my life. And most of the people I know have been doing just the same. In fact, statistically, many of you here today drank coffee. Well, in the world, every day, over 2 billion cups of coffee are sipped. Now imagine the enormous amount of water that it would take to produce all that coffee. Let's bring a familiar landscape, so let me actually show it to you. If we imagine Athens and the Acropolis, it would take an amount of water all the way to the top of the Parthenon, 150 meters tall, and expand to be 2 kilometers wide. It will look like this on Athens. Look at it. It's just an exorbitant amount of water. It turns out coffee is actually one of the most water-intensive crops to produce. It's a thirsty crop. And while 2 billion cups of coffee sounds like a lot, and it is, it's not quite as much as all the other crops that we consume. So why don't we take a look at how much water all these crops take to produce, adjusted for the actual consumption level. So let's look. Coffee takes about 200 trillion liters of water, but that's just a fraction of all the water that every year gets devoted to wheat, maize, and rice, our staple crops. These are the crops that the world needs to survive. These are the crops we primarily feed on. Look at rice, for example. Rice alone takes 2.5 quadrillion liters of water. These numbers are enormous. These are big numbers. These scales, they start losing meaning. So my point really is we consume a lot of water. And most of this water goes towards agriculture. Now, it's interesting because what happens if there is a disruption to the water system? Now, take a look at this map. These red areas here, they represent water stress. So the areas where we take almost all of the water available. And the blue dots, they represent the agricultural production hubs. These are the main region where we grow almost all the food that we consume. Now, it turns out most of them sit right on top of the most water-stressed regions. So I know what you're wondering. So what happens if we run out of water? Do we have enough water? And, what happens if there's a drought one year? What happens if all of a sudden supply can't keep up with demand? What happens if El Nino causes a water shortage? What happens if there is a conflict in one of these areas? Water disruption affects food production, which in turn affects prices, but livelihood, and ultimately survival. So if you look at this map, you might start feeling concerned. Certainly I have. And if you think that this doesn't apply to you because you don't live close to one of these red areas, well, think again. Because just like coffee, all these crops travel the world before getting to your table. They are all part of the same global supply chain that Liz showed earlier. Now, it is easy to think that, water is just needed for agriculture, but in reality, just like Liz mentioned earlier, water is needed for everything. We need it for production. We need it for manufacturing. Urban infrastructure itself needs water. Electricity generation, data centers, they all require huge amounts of water. And we cannot live without it. Water system is fragile. Water system is already under stress. But yet we keep taking from it. And we actually have been taking for years. See for yourself, since 1970, global water withdrawals have increased dramatically. But that's just one of the key indicators of supply and of demand, and consumption. CO2 emissions, energy consumption, raw material extractions. These charts, they show and measure different things, but they all tell the same story. Demand is rising fast, and modern life requires more. And I wonder, can we keep this up? Can we keep taking from our system? Because all of this more comes with consequences. Our planet is warming, our climate is changing, our resource system is stretched thin. All the while, billions of people rely on these resources to be readily available. And, demand is at its highest it's ever been today. But guess what? Demand is going to keep increasing. Consumption is going to keep increasing. And to understand where we're going, we need to look at people, where people live, and how they live. Now, our colleague, Jess Bagongo, researched this topic in depth. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here with us today, but we'll hear later on from her through a video message that she recorded. In the meantime, I'll pass it over back to Liz to explain how the world is changing in the decades ahead.
Thank you, Fabio. So we focused on water because it's illustrative of the broader trend happening across resources, across our systems. But there is one common factor in all of this. It's us. The coffee we drink in the morning, the energy that powers our homes, the flights we took to get to this conference. And all of these actions feel small. They feel insignificant. But when you multiply them across billions of people, this is what happens. And the population is not staying stagnant. So this chart puts the global population into a few different buckets to illustrate the trend. We have the continent of Africa, India, China, and the OECD, because they all have about the same size population today. and then the rest of the world. But the chart will not stay looking like this for the next few decades. By 2050, the world population will grow by nearly 2 billion people. And this growth will not be evenly distributed. In developed economies and some emerging, population growth is actually slowing as birth rates fall. This leads to smaller workforces and an older population. As someone who lives in one of these economies, this trend is really worrisome because as populations age, it increases pressure on healthcare systems, pension funds, it creates labor shortages, and it overall has a negative impact on our long-term economic growth. Now, on the other end of the spectrum is Africa. The continent is projected to grow by nearly double over the next 25 years, which will be a profound transformation. Because population growth is not just about numbers. It's where demand is spiking, where infrastructure needs to be built, where economic opportunities may emerge. But the population is not simply going to be getting bigger, but people will be changing how they live. By 2050, nearly 80% of the world is going to live in urban areas, with most of this change driven by Asia and Africa. Now, why are we talking about urbanization? Why does this matter? Well, when people move to cities, they consume more food, more energy, more water, increasing the pressure on our already strained systems. So if we think back to those demand curves we showed a moment ago, the upward trend will not only continue because the population's getting bigger, but because there will be more people consuming more. Now, urbanization in and of itself is a very good thing. It increases mobility, it creates opportunity, and it overall boosts the quality of life for billions of people. So the problem we face is not how do we curb urbanization? It's how can we sustainably develop? Because when cities grow faster than the systems that underpin them, pressure begins to build. And this pressure is not abstract. It's not a random data point on a chart. It's if water comes out of your tap. And if it does, if it's safe enough to drink. If your electricity is reliable. If infrastructure can keep pace. Now, as Fabio mentioned, our colleague Joyce recorded a brief video message, so I'm going to turn to that now to explain this trend a little bit more in depth.
There has never been a more exciting time to be alive as a young African from a city. I'm Joyce Bongongo. I'm an associate fellow at CSIS. I work for a program known as the Hess Center for New Frontiers, where we track some of these trends you're all seeing today. I myself am from Johannesburg, but I have friends from Accra, from Lagos, Nairobi, and having spoken to different people, I've noticed some through lines, some trends. Across these trends, there are 3 challenges. The first challenge is infrastructure. I grew up in a city where load shedding or power outages became the norm at a certain point. Entire neighborhoods and businesses had to plan their routines around these different load shedding levels and sometimes endure entire working days without electricity. The second challenge, I would say, is water, or lack thereof. A city like Cape Town in South Africa, known for its bustling tourism and main attractions, in 2018 was counting down days to what was known as Day Zero, or the day where the entire city would run out of municipal water. And that continues to be a challenge across the country and the continent. The third challenge would be jobs. Every year, millions of Africans graduate and yet are facing massive unemployment rates. The same forces also present opportunities to not just the young people across the continent, but the world. The first opportunity being the people themselves. By the year 2050, 1 in 3 people across the world will be African and between the ages of 15 and 34. That's a whole generation of talent. The second opportunity is technology. From mobile banking systems like M-Pesa to AI and new coding scripts that are coming out throughout different colleges across the continent. And the third opportunity are the cities themselves. More people means more consumers. In the coming decades, the African urban population is expected to double. That presents an entire new market for the private sector across the world. We really need to take these trends seriously, not only to mitigate the challenges that are before us, but to take advantage of the opportunities that lie ahead.
We started with a cup of coffee because it's simple and easy to take for granted. But that cup only exists because a much larger system worked well enough to get it here. And those systems are increasingly under strain. And if they fail, the consequences are immediate. Shortages, blackouts, rising prices, political instability. And these failures no longer stay local. So these consequences can be felt far from where the actual disruption or issue happened. Take Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. It spiked global food prices to record highs, impacting the most vulnerable populations just as they were beginning to recover from the COVID pandemic. Or in 2023, the Panama Canal experienced a drought so severe that shipping traffic had to decrease by 40%, driving up shipping costs and delaying the delivery of essential goods to people all over the world. So the question is not if the world is changing. It is. For our generation, change has really been the only constant. Our childhoods consisted of 9/11 and the global financial crisis. As we got older, there were wars, terror attacks, climate change, the pandemic, not to mention the rise of the internet, social media, and now AI. The question is if our institutions and our political systems can manage this change before pressure becomes crisis. And that's what we're going to discuss now more in depth. What this looks like in real life, in different countries, under different constraints, and what it will take to respond. So I'd like now to welcome the rest of our panel to the stage to discuss.
Well, thank you, Liz and Fabio, for that. Can we get another round of applause for them? It was a really great presentation. Welcome, everyone, and good morning. I'm Matthew Funaiole. I'm the Vice President for the Dracopoulos Ideas Lab at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., where I work very closely with Liz and Fabio using data and data visualization, as well as video, podcasts, websites, and a whole suite of multimedia tools to unpack complex foreign policy issues. And while we make probably hundreds and hundreds of charts and visuals every year, I don't think we've ever gotten to display them in as cool of a room as this, or on as big of a screen as this. So big shout out to SNF. It's an honor to be able to present our work in this kind of a setting. But what I'm really excited about, and what I think everyone is probably really excited about, is the panel discussion. We have a great group of panelists here to dig into the trends that Liz and Fabio just brought up. Before we jump into that, I want to give everyone just a quick chance to introduce themselves. We have a big panel. It's been a lot of names. We have people from all across the globe. But Hilary, if you want to get us started, and then we'll jump in.
So, hi everyone, my name is Hilary and I'm from Hong Kong. I'm currently an undergrad student in the University of Hong Kong doing comparative literature and also history. So,
You already met Liz, so
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Christine Mungai. I'm a journalist and writer from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Continent newspaper. We're a Pan-African media house that publishes a PDF newspaper, and we distribute it primarily on WhatsApp, on email, Signal, and Telegram. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Sikelela Rollom. I am a youth leader for an organization called Radio Workshop. It's a storytelling organization that trains youth across Africa in terms of radio and podcasting. I am also a media and communications graduate from Nelson Mandela University. It's a good feeling to be part of this panel.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Melina Theodosiou. I'm a second-year student at the Ionian University at the Department of Digital Media and Communication. I'm also an alumni of the CSIS Journalism Bootcamp last December. Here in Nostos, I collaborate with Radio Workshop and NIMED, and I'm one of the youth reporters.
And you met Fabio. So you all just saw this presentation. You got a lot of stuff thrown at you. Everyone here got a lot of information thrown at them. We had water security, we had food security, we had global supply chains, we had population growth, urbanization. I'm probably forgetting one of the trends that was in there. So before we get into how we think we might want to solve some of these issues, let's just take a little bit of a step back and think, what resonated with you the most? What in the presentation really stuck with you now that you've actually seen it? And what has you thinking, right? What's sticking in your mind? Hilary, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I'm born and raised in Hong Kong, and for context, it's a hyper-developed city where you literally have to only wait for 30 seconds to get on a train. So that's how developed it is. And I also did a couple of research. I just found out that we are ranking the fourth, at the highest median wealth per adult in the Global Wealth Report, and literally the second in the Ultra Net Worth Report this year. So it goes to show how affluent most of the Hong Kong people are and how much international opportunities that we have the resource to be exposed to. And I personally also sit at the average Hong Kong people to travel at least for 3 times to 5 times a year. So we do have the resource to go beyond our area. But then oftentimes, as Liz mentioned in the presentation, the interconnectedness of our world is often hidden. And the privilege that we have in Hong Kong, especially the resource that we have, did not really create something that exposes us to more information, but instead it kind of creates a blind spot, at least for me, because things like a coffee or things like water, rice, all of these are so normalized to us. And it kind of really create a blind spot for us to take everything for granted. That I also love drinking coffee, and I love drinking coffee, especially during midterms or final season. So I drink, of course, 5 cups of coffee a day, and I never realized.
How many did you have this morning?
I had 3.
Okay, pretty average.
No, but I never realized how much of the resource is straining. So thank you so much for the presentation.
Yeah. Oh, no, I mean, I think as we were creating the presentation, and we've kind of been working on this kind of area of study for a few years now, and before going into it, we also did not realize, or at least I did not, how resource intensive everything was. And on the water side, how much of that is hidden and you never see it. Like just with coffee, for example, how most of it is just in the growing and the cultivating of the trees. We also, we've looked a lot at meat production, especially beef. And the part that's really interesting for that is beef is also a very high per capita water crop. But almost all of that water, I assumed, okay, maybe it's the cows are drinking it. It's actually the alfalfa that the cows eat. That is what takes so much water. So the more you dig into it and keep diving in layers, it's very interesting, and it at least made me really reflect on how we consume.
Sure. I think for context, when we first got the invitation to come to Athens, the 3 of us were sitting around trying to figure out what it was we were going to present on, and we were all drinking coffee at the time. And we were like, Is there a way we can tie coffee into this and make that be the theme that runs through it? But why don't we go ahead, Chris, do you kind of jump into like what resonated with you the most?
Yeah, sure. I come from Kenya, which is a coffee-growing country. Anyone who is serious about coffee knows how amazing Kenyan coffee is. So something that jumped at me as I was watching the presentation is, I think in today's kind of capitalistic world, we make this assumption that price is actually an indicator of value. But when you talked about hidden water, what resonated with me is also the invisibility of the people who actually create the coffee, right? So when you look at the numbers, a Kenyan farmer selling a 1 kilogram bag of green coffee, he sells that bag for less than $1. It's about 75 or 80 cents per kilogram. When this coffee is shipped to Italy to be roasted, the roaster would get maybe $30 per kilogram. And then when a big chain like Starbucks or Peet's or something like that, when they sell the coffee, that 1 kilogram bag is about 70 cups of coffee that they're going to sell for $400. So if you just trace that chain, the Kenyan farmer is basically getting 1.2% of the final price of the coffee, of the final value that the market has assigned to this bag of coffee. But the reality is that the coffee bean hasn't changed that much in that chain. Kenyan coffee in and of itself has great flavor because of the soil that it's grown in, because of the land practices that we follow. The farmers take great care in interspersing their coffee trees with agroforestry so that it can keep attracting the rain. Yet, the value that we have assigned along the chain do not reflect that by the time the coffee is leaving the port of Mombasa, it already has its value and its flavor locked in. So what resonated to me was just how much injustice is built into these global value chains. You can't tell me that the coffee that you would drink at an outlet in DC, for example, is 99.8% different from what was exported from Mombasa, yet the price in Mombasa is that 1.2%. That's what I was thinking as I was watching the presentation.
All right, so for me, the presentation made me think about the importance of appreciating the resources that you have access to. It took me back to a village in the Eastern Cape called Engqushwa, which is where I used to stay. And there, for us to get access to water, we solely depend on rain. So when there's water scarcity, our grandmothers, grandfathers would be speaking about, oh, we need to pray, rain needs to come. So the whole presentation just reminded me of the importance of water and how it contributes to everything else in our lives.
I agree with all of you guys. For me, the whole presentation reminds how our global systems are connected, and if there's a problem in one of them, it can affect all of the other areas.
Yeah, no, I also want to add on this because when we were researching for the presentation, we obviously did the research and we really found out that everything is connected. The supply chain that we saw on the globe, there's a real network of shipping routes and lanes that brings everything together. To ride with the coffee symbol, like I'm an Italian and I love coffee. And we were researching like all the routes of coffee, and I noticed, coffee gets shipped to Italy, then gets roasted somewhere else. Maybe sometimes it gets roasted in Italy and then packaged somewhere else, or vice versa. So it really is just one ring in a chain that covers the globe. So that's what resonated with me, like while researching the presentation and thinking constantly about how these resources are shared and part of the global system. Resources and also problems related to the global system, because if there is a disruption in one ring of the chain, well, that generates a domino effect. So the issues and the consequences are felt globally, right? So we say like problems might look and sound local, but the consequences are global. So that was a constant sort of denominator on our research and the presentation. So that's what stays with me.
Yeah, I think, Melina, it's a really good sort of point to bring out, and Fabio, that's good context, and I think it brings us to the question of like, what do we do about it, and who's responsible for doing something about it, or what are the different levels in which people can try to address that? You think, what's the role of government, whether that's national government or local government, or what are the role of international organizations, or at a more local level, grassroots organizations, civil society, what are the role that they all sort of play in it? So maybe, and we'll go in reverse order this time. Fabio, start with you and work back this way. Just reflecting on who do you think needs to be taking action, or what are the different levels we need to be taking action on to try to address some of these challenges? And maybe while you're thinking about your responses to that, keep in mind both, either where you grew up or maybe where you work, right? What have you seen that works? What have you seen that doesn't work? Some of us are from DC, and obviously there's a lot of political gridlock in DC these days, and so we see a lot of tension when trying to get things done. But Fabio, I don't know if you want to kick us off.
I love that. Thanks for asking, Matthew. And that brings me to where I'm from. I'm from Italy. I grew up in Sardinia, and Sardinia is a wonderful place. I recommend you all go. But then I left Sardinia, and I now live in the United States. I get to work with these amazing people. I think my story is not a unique story. Many leave Sardinia, and they do so because there are very few and limited job opportunities. While we might have a good publicly funded education system, we don't have a bridge to a sustainable job market. Now, there are different ways to look at this particular issue that affected me and affects many like me and my age and future generation as well. But I feel that the generation sort of division is one sort of a recurrent way to look at the problem. The way that some public policies have been set in Sardinia, or for that matter, in other parts of Europe, sort of created an environment for which the job market became rigid throughout the years, and investments had to be made for the older and the aging population, which means primarily healthcare system and pension funds. That left a more impoverished and rigid sort of working age job market. That proved to be especially hard for those of my generation. So, Matthew, to your question, like how do we face these challenges? The way that I see it, challenges can be obviously seen from a local standpoint. The meaningful ones are more generational or perhaps even global. So those who are best positioned to sort of face and drive this change are, I want to say kind of optimistically as well, those in our generation, those who are empowered by understanding, information, and education, I would say. Yeah.
Basically, I believe that the meaningful change can't come from one group. Governments play an important role in that, but also local communities, journalists, and the young generation, of course. Some solutions need to come from the top, but while others come from the group up.
Yes, I agree with my fellow colleagues. I think citizens, community members have a big role to play, especially in terms of the leaders that we choose, because they are the ones who have control over how they will use the money when it comes to ensuring residents have access to water and electricity. So I think it's important for us to use our democracy to ensure that we choose the right people. And even if we choose the wrong ones, as people, we can gather and remove that person who might not be doing their job properly.
Yeah, I'll speak from my positionality as a journalist. I believe that our role as journalists is to interrogate power and systems. And that's what we do at the continent. All our stories are, processed from that perspective and that lens. Who benefits? How did this come to be? What comes next if this continues? I think generally in society, we kind of take things for granted. We imagine that things are the way they are because that's how it's supposed to be, or that's how it has always been. And we're a little bit oblivious sometimes of the power and the human decisions that have created the world that we live in today. Like, things did not have to be like this. People in power actually made decisions to make this happen. So as a journalist, I'm always looking at the world from that lens of power and not inevitability. I think journalists sometimes fall into kind of stereotypical tropes of describing the world, that we don't really scratch the surface and interrogate what we need. I mean, what we actually mean. In one of the charts, I saw a line trending up on raw material extraction. And I asked myself, who's extracting and where? When we say our changing world in charts, that pronoun our is doing a lot of work there, and I think we need to, who are we talking about here? There are places in the world that are extracted from, and then there are places in the world that benefit from that extraction. And it's not inevitable that it had to be like this. Like, power made these decisions. And for me, that's what I think about. I recently read this statistic that said that if everyone in the world lived the way people in Norway or Sweden or in Western Europe lived, we would need 3.9 Earths to sustain that kind of living. We don't have 3.9 Earths, And if everyone in the world, conversely, if everyone in the world lived, for example, the way we in Kenya generally, the average Kenyan lived, we would need 0.7 Earths. So I think we would, we all agree that a better standard of education and health and infrastructure is good, but there is a level of over-extraction that we need to take seriously and interrogate some of our language around this. For example, this dichotomy of developing versus developed countries. I think we should rephrase that. Maybe developed countries should be called resource extracting countries. And then developing countries, then the so-called developing countries maybe should be called future preserving countries. That's my proposition.
I think on that same note, with resource extraction, so I'm originally from Southern California, where water stress is very real. Southern California grows many of the crops that feed most of the US and also a lot of the globe, especially the alfalfa that feeds a lot of the cattle across the globe. And I think water stress, interestingly, is a good example of a problem that takes both government but also individual actors to solve, playing very different roles. I remember growing up in California, and it was all very focused on what the individual is doing, when majority of the stress is driven by these massive agriculture and farms. There was, time limit on your showers, people installing turf instead of real grass. You'd get a ticket for washing your car in the driveway. And while that's all good, it really does not make an impact on the overall water situation. So for government's role, California relies largely on the Colorado River for its water supply, along with many other Western states who are all competing for this same source. And this is really where we need interstate cooperation, and governments need to come together and determine who gets the rights to the water, where does the allocations go, what does need to go to agriculture to feed our population, what needs to go to domestic towns. In Arizona, there are towns literally that ran out of water. And then also, how do we prep and future-proof, as we know, these trends are only going to be continuing. Now, on the flip side, on the individual farmer or industrial farm level, there's a lot of room for improvement on utilizing best practices. And I think, interestingly, this is actually a very good use case for AI. There's already been deployment in AI-powered precision agriculture. So farmers can know, okay, which crops need water, specifically when, specifically where. So we're being much more mindful of what we are doing and versus just, flooding a crop and hoping for the best. So I think that's a really interesting way to look at a problem with the top-down, bottom-up approach, and that can be multiplied, across the various issues as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of my panelists here, especially for the coexistence of top-down and bottom-up approach, especially when, obviously, to truly mitigate the problem is through internation government collaboration, but then to drive changes, it has to go from bottom up on mitigating also the blind spot that I was talking about. Drawing from the context in Hong Kong, a lot of the logic that we learn are externally enforced to us instead of internally induced. And this is something that I want to pinpoint, especially when the facts are immediately handed to us interface. So it's pretty uncommon for us to question it. So going back to the coffee example, when coffee become the norm in that city, are we really able to question the source of that, or are we really able to question whether it's really supposed to be the norm, or are we dragging a lot of resources? And I also want to share, there's a Cantonese saying talking about the exact same thing. It's called, the English translation is basically, you have to know the source of the water you drink. And in Cantonese, it's yam soi si yun. So this is something that I think for all of us here, as for all of the developed nations, countries, they also have to be reminded that we have to think of the source and we have to question more when facts are externally handed to us instead of blindly just following that and accepting the norm is the norm.
Yes. I think there's a lot of really interesting things to pull on in those responses. So let me see if we can try to weave a few of them together. So, Chris, I think bringing out the idea that people are inheriting a system that was created, right? It wasn't just that it came into the world like that. It was something that was created through decisions that people in power made over time, and it builds inertia, and then it becomes institutionalized, and then it becomes really hard to change. And Melina, you mentioned young people, right, and the role that they play. So maybe, and we can come back, and Hilary, I think, you sort of ended on a good point, and we can transition from that into the next question is, what's the role of young people in all of this, right? If you think about people who are a little bit older, they're already vested in those systems, right, and how those systems are set up, and they are sort of being, welcomed into it as they are, entering into the job market and starting to, invest, buy property, things of that nature. So how do you think about the role of young people in being a spark for the kind of change that all of you have kind of mentioned in your comments?
For younger generation, especially for us, we're definitely having a lot more resource to go abroad. Say for 50 years earlier, I don't think going abroad, traveling is that much often, but then here we are in Greece together. So we are definitely enjoying a lot more resource to expand our horizon beyond our nation. So this is something that we have to weaponize more, because this is something that is pretty exclusive to our generation, and given the resource in front of us, are we really trying to settle for blindly accepting what's handed in front of us, and are we truly really able to question the norms in front of us? So my call to action for maybe the younger generation like us is to, instead of immediately accepting certain information or accepting certain facts, think of maybe the source, think of why is that, or think of maybe there are other alternatives that we have not yet exposed to, or other other alternative that we're not yet exposed to. So
I think that's a really interesting point. And, we talk a lot about, as a member of Gen Z, the constant, the social media and internet and AI and all this information we're getting and being like toxically online. And while there certainly are a lot of issues with internet and being addicted to our phones, I think social media actually has also been a very good thing for our generation because it's made problems that historically we never would have seen be on the forefront. We can see civil rights issues happening across the globe, climate change disasters happening, and we would never have been able to see that before. And our generation, I think, that adds a convening power and it adds a motivation to understand and see what's going on outside of our individual bubbles. And it presents a lot more opportunity for kind of collective action, everyone coming together. So while there are problems, many problems with it, I do think it presents a really good advantage for our generation with these massive global problems that we can all be on the same page and work together to address them.
If I can may jump on this, Liz, I think your point is extremely spot on because I've been also thinking about the impact of this generation. We inherited this world with this massive problems. We looked at it like we have all this, climate change. We've been through pandemics and the rest. Like you mentioned them yourself, and it does feel overwhelming for me. At the same time, though, we are also, like you said, the most connected generation. And I will also dare to say that we are the most maybe informed generation, the one that has the highest and fastest access to information. Just want to mention AI, the capabilities and the potential behind AI, the way that we can access information and the efficiency of how we get informed today. This is something that my parents didn't even dream of, couldn't dream of. My father used to say, "Oh well, if I had internet, I would have finished college in a snap." I'm like, well, it's not that easy, Dad. I assure you that, but it's a valid point. So I do see these challenges. They scare me also, but I also see the side of the empowerment and the sense of community, like you mentioned. Like with social media, we do feel that we are part of this community, this collective awareness of where things stand, and that carries the power of acting on it. So, I just felt a very good point to add this, because the access to information, the access to this educated view of the world, that it is all comprehensive, is empowering.
And Chris, does that impact kind of how you think about journalism as well, right? Just like that instant ability to get information to people?
Yeah, absolutely. I can share some perspective from our publication, The Continent. Like I mentioned in my introduction, we produce a PDF newspaper. We do not publish our stories on our website. PDF is an ancient format. Like, who does that? But I'll tell you...
Doesn't even know what it stands for anymore?
No one even knows. But I'll tell you the reason why we made such choices, which goes to my earlier point that you don't have to do what has always been done. You can make deliberate decisions as a form of resistance against the powers that are always against you. So in the past 2 or so years, major news publications have seen their web traffic crater. 70%, 80% drop in traffic. Why? It's because they depended on big tech, on Google and Facebook, to direct readers to their websites. But now with Google AI overviews, people are not clicking on the links anymore because they're just getting a summary of the stories, right? But at the Continent has been publishing for 6 years, and I think I'd like to say that we were a bit ahead of the curve on this. We distribute our PDF through WhatsApp. So we don't depend on being visible to algorithms in order to reach our community. It just appears on your WhatsApp feed like the way your text from your brother or your sister would. The other thing is that we edit our stories very short. A news story is just 300 words. It's very difficult for most journalists to write concisely and most editors to edit concisely. But it turns out that that is actually what makes our publication readable from beginning to end. We're 30 pages, and most of our readers say when they get the newspaper on Saturday, they actually read it from the beginning to the end. Why? Because our newspaper comes in at what we call a news moment. A news moment is a point in the day when you can just sit down, read what you need to read, and then move on with your life. Unlike if we were publishing on our website or, depending on Twitter or on Facebook, you end up being in this like infinite scroll and inundated, and like there's actually no signal to stop, right? For us, we have an end page. There's a signal to stop. Stop reading us and go live your life, So I think for me, that's the opportunity that is before us. Like Fabio said, there's so much connectedness in the world today, but we don't have to take the pathways that are, the well-worn paths. You can also just take a different decision. And we have not seen our traffic affected in any way by the rise of AI because we exist where people are on WhatsApp. That's not to say that we are eternally insulated. Maybe something will change with WhatsApp. I don't know, who knows? Maybe they'll hear me. Please don't change anything, whoever is listening. But I just think that when you make deliberate decisions that are actually informed by a deep understanding of how power works, then we end up being in a space where this archaic format ends up being our saving grace in today's digital world. Yeah. Thank you.
Do you guys have anything you want to add, thinking on either young people and this change, or journalism, or anything on that note, or AI?
Okay, I just want to add on what young people can do.
Sure.
I think young people should also be active when there's these situations about the lack of water. In South Africa, we call it water shedding. So you'd see that in some communities, when there's no water, protests would occur. However, some of us as young people, we would just sit back and let mommy and daddy go to the protest. So I think we should also be like active citizens and go out there and raise our voices as well.
Yeah, I want to add something too about the new generation, the young generation. I agree, we are the most connected generation than ever before. And I believe we have to use all of those connections to make a difference, a bigger difference globally, basically.
Great. And if I could jump in really quick on the journalism, kind of journalism and young people kind of connection. I think, Chris, you made a really great point about learning how, it's all about meeting people where they are and keeping up with what people need, when they need it, and then also, training the future of journalists to be able to do that and to execute that. At CSIS, we run this program that SNF amazingly funds for us. It's one of my very favorite things, called the Journalism Boot Camp, that both Chris and Melina have both participated in, all about, we bring young journalists or journalism students to CSIS for a week, train them on how to report an in-depth story. We do data visualizations, video, podcasts, but being able to help people learn to meet people where they are. And I think a really interesting piece of journalism as it's evolving with these big major problems is not just identifying what the problems are, but reporting on what people are doing to solve them, what's working, what hasn't worked, what's the data behind it, so that people can actually make informed decisions on what to do next about these things. I think when there's only, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong, it can be really overbearing and depressing to read. So if we're able to then also report on, and this is what's trying to be done on it, it's a much more refreshing way to look at journalism and hopefully also solve these problems.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, for us at CSIS, a big part is trying to put data and evidence at the forefront of everything that we do, right? And we might interpret it, but be as transparent and as possible in here's what we looked at, here are the facts, here's how we're interpreting what those mean, but it's all open, right, to everyone to access. We have 2 minutes left, so I want to do something rapid fire, just here, quick at the end. So I'm going to combine a couple of things. One is, and we'll start with you, Hilary. So start thinking about it. Is what worries you the most about maybe the next 10 years? What worries you the most, and something that we absolutely have to get right? Something that is a problem that we have to solve. But then I want to flip it around because I want to end on an optimistic note, because I know there's been a lot that we've talked about that's maybe a little pessimistic this morning. What are you most optimistic about over the next 10 years? Just really quick, and we'll go down the line as quick as possible, and then we'll wrap. But Hilary?
I think from my context or from my background, I'd say what worries me the most is how much resource we have right now and how elevated our living style is. For example, in Hong Kong, we're traveling much more often than the rest of the world, and we're also exploiting a lot of things that we don't know we're exploiting. But on an optimistic side, we're becoming more educated, we're becoming more exposed to information that we never had before. We're also exposed to a lot of resources, chances, opportunities like this conference to get to know things that we have never questioned before. So all of these knowledge that are handed to me or handed to us are eventually going to be questioned. And this is something that I think is that we have to be happy about, because as we question things, we learn and we know that things can be different from what's in front of us. Like, why are knowledge even knowledge? Who created the knowledge? And this is something we learn a lot in the literature class. So yeah, the information and the elevated lifestyle, of course, is something that really worries me. But then the intellect that we have is definitely something that cheers everything up.
Oh, that was good. We have 20 seconds left. Does everyone agree with what Hilary said? Anyone want to add anything? And I think that was probably the best.
I think I can add something quickly.
Yeah.
What worries me the most is the complacency that I think many of our societies are in. Like what Liz said, this idea that small incremental changes will make the difference when it's actually power. It's big, it's big corporations that are doing all these things. I was once on a panel where I made the point about like the coffee value chain, and someone came at the end of the conference to fight me because they were like, but I only drink fair trade coffee and my government supports Kenyan farmers. And then when we did the math, it turns out that the fair trade coffee farmers end up receiving 2% of the value as opposed to 1.2%. Wow, what a difference. So I think just sit with the discomfort. Please don't come and fight me if you drink fair trade coffee. But what excites me the most is being an African journalist in this day and age. I'm very excited about the work that I'm doing and about the stories and the difference and the impact that we're going to make. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to end on. So let's give another round of applause for everyone who participated today. Great job, guys. And thank you all very much. We really appreciate you coming for this discussion.